Caleb Johnson, a black man in his late 40s, stood behind the counter of his small diner on the south side of Birmingham, Alabama. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with skin weathered by years of hard work and worry. His diner, Mama Rose's Kitchen, had once been the pride of the neighborhood. The name came from his mother, Rose Johnson, a woman who taught him that food was more than just food. It was dignity, it was love, it was survival. But lately, survival was all it was. The red leather booths were cracked. The ceiling fans squeaked with every spin. The once bright, neon open sign buzzed and flickered like it might give up any second. Some nights, Caleb stared at that sign and wondered if it was a mirror of himself. Business had been slow for years. White folks from uptown rarely came, some out of prejudice, others because whispers followed the place like shadows. Don't eat at the black man's diner. You don't know what kind of kitchen he's running. Caleb had heard those words too many times. Even black neighbors struggled to come in. They loved him, respected him, but money was tight, and chain restaurants had invaded the area. McDonald's could sell a burger cheaper than Caleb could fry a chicken wing. Yet despite all that, he stayed open. His mother's voice echoed in his head every morning. Son, you keep cooking. Folks may not always pay you in dollars, but if you feed the hungry, God himself gon' pay you back in ways money can't buy. So Caleb kept frying, kept stirring, kept serving. That particular evening was cold. Rain pattered against the window, sliding down in crooked lines. Only a few customers sat scattered across the diner. Two white businessmen in expensive suits sat in the corner booth, talking loudly about their investments. A couple of young white women sat near the window, sipping coffee and scrolling on their phones. Caleb caught fragments of their whispers when he brought them refills. Can't believe we're eating here. My dad would flip if he knew. I know, but it's cheap. Whatever. We'll just go to Olive Garden next time. He ignored it, kept his smile polite, but inside, his chest tightened. It was always the same, like he was good enough to cook for them, but never good enough to be respected. When he returned to the counter, he glanced at the family photo taped on the cash register. His late mother, smiling in her Sunday dress, and himself as a skinny boy, standing proudly beside her. That photo kept him steady. The bell above the door jingled, and a hush seemed to fall over the room. An old white man stumbled in, soaked from the rain. His gray beard was unkempt, his clothes torn, his shoes worn down to thin soles. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, but his eyes, blue and tired, still held a faint spark of dignity. The businessmen glanced up and exchanged disgusted looks. One muttered, not bothering to lower his voice, "Well, this place sure attracts the bottom of the barrel." The young women by the window giggled, covering their mouths as the old man shuffled awkwardly toward the counter, clearly too embarrassed to ask for anything. Caleb noticed how the man hesitated, one hand gripping the door like he might turn and leave. He knew that look. Shame, hunger, pride fighting against desperation. Caleb had seen it too many times, in neighbors, in strangers, even once in himself when he was younger. He stepped out from behind the counter and approached him slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Evening, sir," Caleb said softly, his voice calm. "You look cold." "You hungry?" The man swallowed hard, his lips trembling. He didn't speak, just gave the faintest nod. Ignoring the stares and whispers around the room, Caleb guided the old man to a booth near the back, the one with the cracked red leather, but the softest cushion, The man lowered himself slowly, hands trembling, eyes lowered in shame. Caleb didn't ask for money, didn't ask questions. He went straight to the kitchen and put together a plate the way his mama taught him. Fried chicken golden and crispy, macaroni and cheese creamy and bubbling, collard greens cooked with smoked turkey, and a thick slice of cornbread, still warm from the oven. When Caleb set the plate down in front of the man, the smell alone brought tears to his eyes. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Then his hands, trembling, picked up the fork. The first bite seemed to break something inside him. Tears streamed down his face as he ate slowly, almost reverently, as though every bite was a prayer answered. The businessmen sneered louder now. One stood up, tossing a few bills on the table, saying as he passed Caleb, "This is why your place is dying. Feeding bums instead of focusing on real customers." The women by the window whispered and laughed, glancing at Caleb with judgment in their eyes. But Caleb didn't react. He stood near the booth, watching the old man eat, his heart heavy, but his spirit calm. Because he knew he wasn't just feeding a man. He was feeding a soul. Hours later, the diner was empty. Chairs stacked on tables, lights dimmed. Caleb sat alone in the corner booth, staring at the rain still falling outside. He thought about the looks, the laughter, the cruel words. He thought about how people saw him, not as a man running a business, but as a black man running some rundown joint. And tonight, as if to prove their point, he had fed a homeless stranger for free. But then he thought about the man's face, the way his hands had stopped shaking halfway through the meal, the way his shoulders relaxed, the way tears had turned to quiet gratitude. And Caleb whispered, almost like a prayer, "Lord, I don't know why you put me here, why you gave me this diner, but if my purpose is to feed folks who need it, then that's enough. Let the world laugh. I'll keep serving." What Caleb didn't know, what no one in that diner knew, was that this old homeless man carried a secret that would soon change everything Caleb thought he knew about kindness, race, and the way the world worked. The next morning, Caleb was unlocking the diner when he saw the old homeless man again. He was sitting across the street on a bus bench, clutching a thin jacket around himself as the chilly wind bit at his skin. For a moment, Caleb thought the man would avoid him, maybe too ashamed after the night before. But instead, the man shuffled across the street and stopped in front of the diner. His blue eyes were softer now, but also curious, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Caleb gave him a small smile. "Morning. You hungry again?" The old man hesitated, then nodded. Caleb opened the door, letting him inside before the street traffic noticed. Once seated, the man whispered, his voice raspy from years of hardship. "You didn't have to do what you did last night. Folks like me, we're invisible to most. But you," he paused, swallowing hard. "You looked right at me. Why?" Caleb leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and answered simply, "'Cause my mama taught me every man's worth feeding. Don't matter the color of his skin, the clothes on his back, or the money in his pocket. A man's still a man." The old man's lip trembled. He whispered back, "Even when he's white and sitting in a black man's diner." Caleb's smile faded. He caught the meaning behind the words. He had felt the stares the night before, the whispers, and now, hearing it from the man himself, it hurt more than he wanted to admit. But he nodded. Even then, the man introduced himself as Edward Green. He used to own a construction company years ago, he said, back when business was good and his name still meant something. But then came the collapse of the housing market, lawsuits, debts, and finally, a family that turned their back on him. I had a wife, kids, Edward said, staring at his weathered hands. But when the money dried up, so did their love. Now all I've got left is a coat full of holes in shoes that don't keep out the rain. Caleb listened quietly, feeling the weight of Edward's words. He had seen it too many times. Folks who only loved what a person had, not who they were. But there was something Edward left unsaid. Caleb could sense it. His eyes shifted when he talked about family. His voice shook when he mentioned the past. There was more. Finally, Edward leaned in, lowering his voice like he was confessing to a priest. You're probably wondering why a man like me ended up in a place like this. Why I walked into your diner. Of all places, Caleb didn't reply. But his silence invited Edward to continue. Edward whispered, Truth is, I was raised to believe folks like you didn't deserve much. My daddy used to say, don't ever let a black man serve you, 'cause it means you've fallen too low. And yesterday, when I walked in here, part of me still believed that lie. The words hit Caleb like a blow. For a moment, he wanted to stand up, walk away. The pain of racism wasn't new to him, but hearing it spoken so plainly, from the same man he had fed, it cut deeper. But then Edward's eyes filled with tears. And yet, you treated me better than anyone has in years. Better than my own flesh and blood. You gave me food, kindness, dignity, when I didn't deserve it. Just then, the bell above the door jingled. 3 white men in dusty work boots and ball caps walked in. They were locals, the kind who saw Caleb's diner not as a business, but as a black man's corner joint. They spotted Edward at the table, eating a hot plate of eggs and bacon Caleb had set in front of him. One of them snorted, Well, I'll be damned. Eddie Green, sitting here, letting a black man feed him. Edward froze, shame flooding his face. The men laughed cruelly, slapping each other's backs. Guess beggars can't be choosers, huh? Ain't that something? Rich Eddie Green, the man who wouldn't even hire a black worker, now eating in their kitchen. Caleb's jaw clenched. He remembered now. He had heard that name before. Edward Green's construction company had once been infamous for refusing to hire black laborers. That explained the unease he had felt in Edward's confession. Edward lowered his head, unable to meet Caleb's eyes. The shame was heavy, but Caleb, instead of throwing him out, placed his hand firmly on the table and looked at the men. You done talking? Or you plan on ordering something before you go back to standing on corners acting like fools? The diner went silent. The 3 men exchanged looks, muttered insults, and stormed out, slamming the door behind them. Edward stared at Caleb, stunned. Why'd you defend me? After what I just told you? After what I used to stand for? Caleb took a deep breath, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. Because people can change. My mom used to say, sometimes God'll break a man down to show him what he should have been all along. Maybe that's what he's doing with you. Edward sat silently for a long while. Then he reached into his ragged coat pocket. His hands shook as he pulled out a small, weathered leather pouch. He placed it on the table. This ain't much, Edward said quietly, but it's something I've been holding on to for years. Thought I'd die with it, but maybe you're the man meant to see it. Caleb frowned, confused. What is it? Edward's eyes filled with both fear and hope. "A secret," he whispered. "One that could change your life. Maybe both our lives. But you gotta promise. You'll hear me out before you judge me." Caleb's heart pounded. He didn't know why, but something in Edward's trembling voice told him this was bigger than just an old man's story. Something hidden, something powerful. And as Edward loosened the pouch's string, Caleb had no idea that what he was about to reveal would turn both of their worlds upside down. Caleb leaned forward, watching Edward's trembling hands untie the old leather pouch. The diner's morning light streamed through the window, dust dancing in the air, the silence heavy. When Edward finally spilled the contents onto the table, Caleb froze. Inside were several old deeds, bonds, and a crumpled photograph. The deeds were yellowed, their ink faded, but the names printed on them were clear enough. Land titles. Caleb's eyes darted to Edward. "What is this?" Edward swallowed, his voice breaking. "This land? Most of it belonged to your people. Black families who worked it, sweated on it, bled on it. My father, and men like him, cheated them out of it, bought it for pennies when they were desperate. Some just outright took it." Caleb's chest tightened. His grandfather had told stories about stolen land, about families tricked out of their homes. But to hear Edward confess it, it was a different kind of weight. Edward's hands shook as he pushed the papers closer. "One of those families was yours." Caleb's breath caught. He grabbed the crumpled photograph. It showed a group of black farmers standing in front of a wooden farmhouse. He recognized the face of his grandfather, young and proud, before everything had been stripped from him. Memories flashed. Stories his mom used to tell about how they lost their land, how his family ended up poor, while others built wealth on what should have been theirs. Edward's voice cracked. "My father bragged about it for years. He said taking land from black folks was like taking candy from a child. I grew up believing that was power, believing that was the way of the world. But sitting here in your diner, being fed by the grandson of the man we stole from." Tears slid down Edward's wrinkled face. "It broke me." Caleb's hands shook as he set the photo down. His whole life, he'd lived with the bitterness of injustice, the stories of what his family had lost. And now, the man whose family had stolen it was sitting across from him, begging for forgiveness. Edward cleared his throat, pulling the deeds closer. "These are still valid. I checked years ago. My father never sold most of it, just hoarded it, probably waiting to pass it on to me. But now," he slid the papers toward Caleb, "I want you to have them back. Your family's land, your birthright." Caleb's jaw dropped. His diner was his pride, but land, that was generational wealth. Something that could change the trajectory of his family's future. But his chest tightened. Could he trust this man? Was this redemption or just guilt? Edward's watery eyes searched Caleb's face. "I know it don't erase the past. I know it won't heal every wound. But maybe it's a start. Maybe it's me finally making things right before I leave this world." Before Caleb could respond, the diner bell jingled again. The same 3 white men from earlier walked in, smirks plastered across their faces. "Still sitting with the black man, Eddie," one of them sneered. "Guess you really have fallen all the way down." They spotted the papers on the table, and one snatched them up. "What's this? Don't tell me you're giving him something." Edward stood up shakily, surprising them. His voice cracked but carried strength Caleb hadn't heard before. "That land was never ours to keep. It belongs to his family. Always has." The men burst out laughing. "You gone soft, old man. Ain't no way we letting some black boy take what green men built." But Edward's voice boomed, stronger this time. "No! What green men stole. And I won't let it end that way." The men exchanged looks, clearly disgusted by Edward's defiance. They tossed the deeds back on the table and stormed out, muttering racist slurs under their breath. Caleb stared at Edward, stunned by his courage. Edward collapsed back into his chair, exhausted but relieved. He whispered, "I should have stood up like that years ago. Maybe I wouldn't be sitting here begging for scraps." Caleb picked up the deeds, staring at them. The weight of history pressed down on him. Part of him wanted to rage, to scream at Edward for everything his family had endured. But another part saw the broken man in front of him, finally choosing to do right. Caleb placed his hand firmly over Edward's. "You can't change what your father did. But today you made a choice." That matters. Edward's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he felt lighter. Weeks later, the news spread across town. Caleb Johnson, the black diner owner, was now also the legal owner of hundreds of acres of land. The same land his grandfather once worked. The whispers grew. Some locals were furious, saying Edward had betrayed his own kind. But others, quietly, saw it as justice long overdue. And Edward? He didn't live much longer. But in his final days, he ate every meal at Caleb's Diner. Not as a charity case, but as a friend. When he passed, Caleb closed the diner for a day and hung a sign in the window. "Today we honor a man who finally chose right over wrong." And as Caleb stood on the steps of his diner, looking out at the land that had once been stolen and now returned, he whispered to himself, "This is for you, Grandpa." Justice might come late, but it comes.